Thank you so much for joining us today on the Building Bigger Lives podcast with Michael Regan and myself, Kathryn Peterson. We're super excited about this topic today. We're going to be talking about kind of some hacks on what to do when you attend an event, a conference, training, etc. We all attend a ton of them, and we just want to make sure that you get out the most that you can when you attend. Welcome, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn. Always glad to be with you. And you're right, this is an exciting one because it takes us out of the normal routines that we normally do in our coaching time, and it gives us an opportunity to look at getting out into the larger audience of our peers. And so when we're doing that, it's exciting, and we thought it would be really fun to break this down for our audience because no matter where you are in your world in real estate or lending, you too have to attend events. So let's talk about it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think the first question is there's a ton of things we could choose to go to. There's a conference every minute of the year if we really wanted to find one. So, how do you choose which events to attend?
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to evaluate, especially earlier in the year, is to do somewhat of an event calendar and take a look at where you plan to spend times. Sometimes events are big, like a conference. They're going to be, really, travel is involved, reservations are involved. You've got to get a lot of details coordinated with who's going. But then other events can be small and be local. They can be, community events. They can be events related to your local real estate association or your local lenders association. So there's lots of different things. And I guess the best way to answer your question is I always look for the purpose. And I try to align my purpose with the purpose of the event as best I can, meaning if I know why I would want to be a part of that event and it's in alignment with the value prop that they've presented, like here's why we're putting this event on, that's usually a good place to start. And once I know that there's some potential alignment, I always then look for who else is attending this event that I would really benefit from spending some time with. That could be a client, could be a peer of mine, could be maybe one of the speakers, somebody I'm really excited to hear from, or at a smaller event, could be someone who's in the round table that I really want to get to know. But the point is, I look for purpose first. Are we in alignment? And then I look for the people next. Who would I really benefit from spending time with? How about you, Kathryn? Anything that you do differently or that you might add to that?
Yeah, I think that one thing is I have a different threshold for, hey, if I'm going to have to travel and be gone, I'm going to have a higher threshold of quality, right? Because I'm spending time away from my family, I'm spending time away and money. So I have a little bit higher threshold for those ones I have to travel for versus the ones that might be in my own town that, hey, it's going to be a different reason to go. And maybe I'll take a little bit more risk when there's not as much cost or not as much time involved. So, and sometimes I discover great things that way. I'll hit something in Denver that's pretty close to me that I may not have otherwise done that might be something that I'll attend again, but I wouldn't have really made that jump if it was in New York. So I think that's something to think about too, is just the cost benefit to it as well. What am I going to get out of this, and what's the quality of what the event's going to be?
I'm glad you used that phrase, cost benefit, because I think that's one that I see gets skipped over pretty quickly by some folks that get emotionally engaged because maybe like my two tips, they felt aligned with the purpose. They really were excited for the people, but they maybe didn't take that extra step you're talking about to evaluate, how much time is away, how much money am I spending, and what's the ROI on all of that.
Mhm.
And I think that you're right. That's a really important one. So let's maybe talk a little bit about prep then. What are some of your preparation routines once you've decided that's going to be the right event to attend? And I realize we could be looking at some that are local and small, or some that are regional and some that are national, but just tell me about some of your routines. How do you prep?
Yeah, so I used to not prep at all, and you've helped me a ton with this. But I think it's some things like let's make a list of who we want to connect with while we're there. Who do you know is going to be there? Have you contacted them in advance to say, hey, are you going to this event? Can we set aside time to have lunch or meet up? I think that's been huge for me. Also, what are like a goal might be, hey, I want to get 3 new habits that I want to implement from this event, or I'm listening for some things to help me with my mindset, or I just want to get remotivated because I get a little charge from an event and I need that right now just to boost my mood. And it could be, hey, I want to meet 100 new people in the mortgage industry. Or it could be, hey, as a real estate agent, I want to connect with 5 people in other towns that will send me referrals and build those relationships. So it's setting goals and kind of doing some prep ahead of time to make sure you're actually going to meet those.
Yeah, that's all really good. And I think one of the things that that resonates with me in that is if there are people you want to meet or presenters that you want to hear, things like you referenced, those are great networking opportunities. And if you're prepared ahead of time with a text or a call to coordinate that, the odds of that happening go up exponentially. If you're just hoping to show up in the room and maybe bump into them, that's going to be a little bit tougher. And if that's what you're basing your ROI on for that event, boy, that's putting a lot of your time and money at risk. So good for you to do that ahead of time. How about when you attend these, Kathryn? I mean, you and I've worked on this over the years. Do you go alone? Do you go with someone? And if you do, how do you leverage that time with that other person?
Yeah, I think that's difficult, definitely, because you do have this little bit of obligation, like, oh, do I hang out with them all the time? Sometimes, whatever. So for me, I kind of prefer to attend alone, even if I know who's going to be there, just because it can make things a little bit easier. I've done both, and sometimes it's fun to have someone that's there with you, but it does kind of change your agenda. And I sometimes pack what I do when I'm there because I want to get the most out of that event that I possibly can. So, but everyone's a little different. Some people always have to have a sidekick or they aren't going to go to anything. So I think it depends a little bit on your confidence at the event and what you feel comfortable doing. But for me, I've definitely realized it's good for me to go alone, but then I always meet up with a group of, say, hey, let's have a company event, or let's have this coaching group have dinner. So maybe you can do some group things, but I think not having someone constantly is tough.
Yeah, that's such an interesting observation that you're making. Here's a paradox I've noticed as a coach over the years is sometimes my introverted clients really prefer to go to the event alone, but then find themselves not connecting as well as they should.
Yeah.
Then I find my extroverted friends who love to go with a group of people that sometimes get frustrated that, oh, I didn't meet enough new people because I'm spending so much
Yeah.
time with these people. And I think that goes back to your prep comments earlier is we have to know ourselves. We have to know the people that we're going either with or planning to see. And if you have some sense of clarity, some self-awareness about how introverted or extroverted you might be, and then some awareness of them, you might want to prep for that ahead of time because sometimes going alone for our introverted friends can actually be a really good excuse for why you didn't really meet anybody. And the same is true for our extroverted friends. Going with someone might be the excuse for why you didn't meet anybody. So it's an interesting paradox
Yeah.
and for different reasons.
And
Um,
I'm going to bring up a conference buddy because I've had those too, where you have someone that's attending the event. They're not necessarily going to be with you, but if you're like, oh, I kind of want to go to this happy hour, but I literally know nobody there. So do you want to tag along? And you have that person to text and, let's say, meet up with if you kind of need that person there with you, that can be helpful too. So I call that my conference buddy, and I have a few of those.
I'm well aware of that, and I endorse that. That's a really good strategy. All right, so I may even resemble that comment at some point. So, Kathryn, let's talk about in the prep another thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think is important, and it's how we present ourselves. So now we're going to this event. It might be local, you might have traveled, but at some point, how you present is a big deal. How are you dressed? How are you carrying yourself? What are you carrying with you? Literal things like that. How do you decide that? What are some of your filters for how to prepare how you present yourself in that room?
Well, this is a big one for me because I live in a small mountain town and we don't do things like heels. So it's conferences. I have to think through more thoroughly than most people because I'm a little bit not a country bumpkin, but definitely it stretches me in things like attire, etc. So for me, I try to pull out, okay, what I'm going to have to step it up from where I normally am. Now, some people have to step it down for a conference. So we have both sides of that. But then it's also having that mix. So it depends a little bit on the conference and what's expected. But I do actually, I'm a nerd. So I plan out, hey, this is what I'm going to wear, but I'm going to have some variety because if you've never been to a conference before, let's talk through that too. It might be that you're a little more fancy during the day, but then they also have a happy hour at a club and you have to go change. And then after that, you may do something else and change again. So I know that there are times that I'm like, okay, what do I need multiple things going on here because I'm not going to bring a carry-on, for example, when I go to a 3-day conference. It's just not going to happen. So but I think what's important is that you feel comfortable in what you're wearing and you feel like you have some options to fit in. So you might go and realize this is more formal than I expected. I need to step it up. Good thing I brought that extra sweater or that suit coat. So I think it's having some flexibility in that because even though it shouldn't matter, and I know it shouldn't matter, it does matter. And unfortunately, we do, everybody looks at, hey, this is where I'm comfortable, and you do want to be comfortable, and people will look at your attire and make assumptions on that, and it can make the difference on certain conversations and certain interactions.
Yeah, you touched on something, a couple of things I want to highlight. One is that the location of the event can also help us determine who's attending it, and there may be some local customs. Again, we're mostly West Coast based. If we're attending an event in Los Angeles, the attire for business casual looks a little different than business casual does in Portland, where
Yeah.
they may think a flannel shirt is business casual. Contrast that again with, say, Scottsdale, where maybe golf attire is more business casual. So knowing a little bit about the local custom might help be a guide for that. And then you mentioned something about heels. Now, thankfully, that's not a big decision I need to make on a regular basis. But I'll tell you what is, if I know this is going to be a conference where there's going to be a lot of walking, like say you're attending an event in Las Vegas, everybody knows that, oh yeah, that property is just next door, means you're about a 30-minute walk away. So if your shoes aren't going to work for that, it's going to make the rest of your day pretty miserable. So even though these things may seem a little bit basic, they can be critical to the overall experience you get to have. So I'm really glad you touched on a few of those tips. Now let's get in the room. And again, sometimes we're in a round table where it's a little more intimate. Sometimes we're in a conference where we're in, seating rows with a stage. But regardless of the venue size, what are some of your tips for how you are engaged during that event? Are you note taking? Are you recording things? Like, how do you find your best experiences once you're inside that event and you're participating as an attendee?
I'm going to ask you this question back too when I'm done because I'm
Good.
super curious to hear your answer. So for me, I have my notes and I use Remarkable, so I put them in that. And then I have another page of notes that's separate. And so I'll just kind of take my normal notes to help me listen and learn. But then I'll star things or I'll just immediately write them on a secondary page that's kind of my key takeaways or my key to-dos. And so that it's highlighted from the rest of the stuff. So I don't have to go through pages and pages of notes to find the key takeaways. So I'll pull those out onto a separate sheet of paper. And then also once I'm in there, I try to sit closer to the front just because I know I get distracted if I'm at the back because I'll look at all the people in front of me. And if someone's doing something, it distracts me. So I know that about myself and I try to eliminate those distractions, especially for the speakers I really, really want to hear and I'm really interested in learning. Because I think if you're there and you're doing other stuff, what's the point in being there? You may as well just be at work. So I think that if you're going to be inside the conference, pay attention, get something valuable out of that. And I definitely do that with my notes. Okay. I'm curious to hear your method though.
Well, some of my method is based on what I observe as a coach. So when I sit in a room and I see someone note taking on their laptop, I find that to be a bit challenging because even if they can be 100% focused and taking notes, a laptop communicates access to other apps and programs that could be a distraction from
Mhm.
whatever experience you're having in that room. And so I'm not a fan of it simply for that reason. So I like a tablet like Remarkable because we all know it's a journal tablet. It's not an iPad, it's an actual journal for that purpose. So love the Remarkable. Thank you again, Roy. Love mine. And I also I do love using the notebook as provided by the conference that I'm attending. So if they give me a journal book or we're in a hotel where there's some note paper, here's why I like that. Because later, my intention is not to keep that big journal book or that hotel notebook. It's to force me to then collate that into more meaningful, actionable items after the event. So I really look forward to that time to go back through all of my notes. I want to be as liberal as I can during the event because I'm going to write down a lot of things that later I think, well, that was really inconsequential. I'm not going to use that, or that's not going to matter. I'd rather make that decision than get back and think, oh my gosh, I know Kathryn said something amazing and I can't remember what it was. So I'm
Mhm.
a liberal note taker. I'm just going to wear that thing out. And then my goal is to really schedule some time after the event, chunk it down, create, it's what you called your stars on yours. It's the idea of these are the things that I want to take action on or the people I want to follow up with. And then I try to transfer those quickly into the systems that I already have so I can essentially extinguish that notebook. Sometimes I keep it just because it serves another purpose. Maybe there's a reason I'm going to want to go back to it again and again. So depending upon the event, that does sometimes happen. But my goal is to wring that thing out. I want to get as much out of it as I can. And so it's on me to take as many notes as I can.
And one of the best places to do that is on the plane on the way home, I think is going through those notes is a great place to do that.
And one of the worst places to do it is on the drive on the way home. And focus on the road. No, you're totally right. So if I'm driving, I've got to schedule that time. I got to
Yeah.
time block the debrief. So we'll do somewhat of a postmortem, whether I'm by myself or with a team or as you call them, a conference buddy. I'll make sure that's scheduled because if I'm not able to do that on a plane flight home, then I need to make sure I've carved that time out when I get home. Because you're right, the further away we get from whatever that event you attended was, two things are happening at the same time. You're slowly forgetting some of those things that were important, and you're also losing some of the momentum that was created by those action items. So, yeah,
Mhm.
it's really critical that you've got those ready to go.
Hey, question for you. What do you do during the breaks?
Hmm. Yeah, so this is a popular reality. Is I'm a big fan of try not to bring your electronic device into the event. Try not to check your email. Try not to check your text messages. Certainly, try not to receive a phone call. And so, in order to do that, I try to use breaks for that purpose in the sense that a break is there usually for a short period of time. It's, a bio break for 10 or 15 minutes. So on those shorter breaks, I really try to use that to make sure that's when I focus on clearing out any messages so I'm not distracted at all during the event. Conversely, if it's on the longer breaks, like the lunch break, or like you said, in those end of the days where there's maybe a break between the end of the event and a dinner or a happy hour, I want to be very careful not to then just jump on my phone or jump on my computer because those can be really precious times to connect with somebody. So I have to look at the timing of the break and the purpose of it in order to use that break effectively. And of course, you know this, having spent some time with me, I am going to be drinking water on a regular basis. So that's also my time to make sure that I get freshened up before I get back in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's a good time to connect. There's some people who either they're speaking or they're really engaged in the event and the breaks are the only time they have to chat with somebody. So sometimes it's coordinating that ahead of time of, hey, on break day one, let's connect. So I think that's an important time to do that with people.
And I just thought of another one, and I'll throw it in here because sometimes you get this at an event as well. We talk about a bio break or a lunch break. Sometimes they'll schedule, if it's a morning session, a coffee break, and they'll set up a
Mhm.
coffee station. Wonderful. Go out, have a cup of coffee, visit with someone. But here's a pro tip: bring some mints, because once you've had that coffee, your goal is not to light someone's eyebrows on fire with your coffee breath. And not all of us are blessed with just amazing breath all the time. So if you're going to be the coffee and maybe tea drinker, pack a breath mint. That'll save you some grief down the road.
Yes, absolutely. We've all talked to those people, unfortunately. So speaking of coffee, how do you create the energy that you need to get the most out of that event?
So energy is really important because I think we all understand this. We don't need to get into the science of this to just understand when I come into a room, I'm generally going to either bring the energy of that room up or bring it down. I can attempt to be neutral, but rooms are dynamic. They don't tend to stay the same, and they're not static in the sense that they just get set. They tend to move a lot. And so I've got to be really careful about the energy I'm bringing in. So we mentioned coffee. If you're I don't know, if you're a 2 or 3 cup in the morning kind of a person, and that's really what you need to get amped up for your day, that's all fine and good, but that may not play as well in a conference setting as it does in maybe your normal daily routine. So you might need to be a little bit self-aware of that one, because some people over energize themselves and now they're just like a, speed demon in the room, and nobody's having fun with that. Same is true as if you're not a morning person and coming in dragging like a caveman who just rolled out a bed 5 minutes ago. That sets a tone in the room. So those are probably extreme answers, but I think we all have to maybe take some ownership over this. One of the things I love to do is get up early and go for a walk. A walk allows me to breathe deeply. It allows me to move. It allows me to think. And all these things help prep me for the day ahead at a big event or at a conference. So that's probably my favorite pro tip. But how about you? I know you've got a couple up your sleeve. What are you doing to create energy for yourself and for the room that you're walking into?
So two things. One is sleep, which is always the hardest part. So, I kind of make it a rule that I rarely drink at a conference, alcohol, meaning not water. Because my sleep is better and then I can have more energy that next day. And I think that there's so many things that happen during a conference that sometimes events go till midnight, but it's, hey, I'm going to peace out at 10 because I know it's going to take me an hour to fall asleep. If it's Vegas, it might take me 2 hours because of all the extra oxygen in the air. And I need to sleep because I want to make sure I have a high energy day the next day. The other thing is, how do you recharge? And I think there's people who just need to take a break in their room because they are an introvert and that's where they get their energy and they need to recharge for the next session. So I think it's not only, hey, how do I start my day, but how do I keep my energy high? And I think it's also being conscious about who you're around. Are you sitting with people who build your energy or deplete your energy, and being really protective of that for yourself?
That's such a wise thing to say, Catherine, because all of us are a little bit like that, power plug that we all know. When we plug into that event, it either charges our batteries or it drains them. And if you know it's going to be a drain for you, it doesn't mean don't attend. It just means exactly what you said.
Mhm.
Schedule that time to be alone in your room. I've found sometimes at an event, literally 15 minutes alone in my room. I don't even need to take a nap. I just need to hear nothing for 15 minutes. And
Mhm.
it's amazing how much good that does for your soul if you're going to go back out for that evening session or that, afternoon session, to just take a break and recharge your battery. So excellent pro tip on your end. All right, let's look toward the end of this event. Now we're coming to the end of whatever that is, whether it was that one morning or that one day or a 3-day conference. At some point, we talked about the idea of how we sort through our notes. What are some of the other things you do to tie down an event and transition back into your normal home routine? What's next?
Yeah, so for me, I try to break it into, hey, who are the new contacts that I made? What are my to-dos when I get back, and do some of those in order of priority. hey, do I need to put this on my calendar? Do I need to talk to a person on my team about implementing this or that? So I kind of try to break that down and then make sure I have any follow-ups I need to do. Like, let's say I talk to somebody and they want to have a chat. Well, let's work on reaching out to them so we get that on the calendar right away. And then some of it's also, hey, what can I do to just make sure I'm writing some sort of, hey, what was my overall takeaway of the event? And also evaluating the event for myself. Would I go back again? What would I do differently? Which is something I used to do on vacation of, hey, I brought socks to Mexico. I'm not going to do that again. Things like that, that you're like, this is, where you come up with next time I'm going to bring more comfortable shoes. So it's kind of a little bit of a wrap up in my mind.
So your segue is beautiful because one of the things I will run is called a KISS filter. And KISS stands for keep, improve, start, and stop. And so I'll make a simple little journal exercise out of this while it's fresh in my mind. If I were to attend this event again or another event in the near future, what would I definitely keep doing because that was helpful? It was effective. It worked. What would I improve upon because it was good, but maybe not as good as it could have been? What would I start doing because I realized, oh, I picked up on other people doing this and I wish I had thought of that? And what would I stop doing because I realized I put a lot of effort into something that didn't matter at all? Maybe like the socks in Mexico. I don't know. I'll just take your word for that. Um, but whichever of those it is, I think that's a really helpful tool. Another couple of tips that I'm a big fan of is if I've met someone at that event, especially like you said, we're going to follow up later, we're going to talk, we're going to have some sort of future meeting. One of the things I try to do quickly when I am on one of those breaks where I've checked a message is I'll look them up on LinkedIn and create a connection right then and right there. Because I know if I've done that, I've created a message they are going to receive that says, hey, Michael wants to connect with you. And it at least puts some effort into play. It's not my only effort I'm going to do, but it puts a little bit of a stake in the ground that says, hey, my intention is I want to get to know you better. I want to follow up. The other thing I've learned to do, and frankly, this is a pro tip from my wife, Lori, is I will put in my calendar my intention to calendar the next thing. Meaning we may not have set up that meeting yet, but I'll put in my calendar for the very next day after the event to set up a meeting with Kathryn. And that is a really healthy reminder for me to not lose track of it in a device where I'm not likely to lose track of it. Where again, if I wrote it in my journal, I do have an intent to, ring that out, as I said earlier, but that might not be as immediate as my need to get that event scheduled. So using your calendar to schedule what will be in your calendar, that helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, if you only attend the conference and don't implement anything or stay in touch with anybody, that's that can be a waste, and then you're just going to go. So make sure you're going to get some benefit out of it.
That I hadn't thought of this, but that could fall into the stop category in the KISS is
Mhm.
maybe you've attended an event with good intentions and you realize this wasn't the event for me. This
Yeah.
wasn't what I should have spent my time doing, but I'm not going to beat myself up over that because I didn't know. I didn't know until I went and gave it my very best effort.
Mhm.
And that's definitely happened to me a few times over the years, especially with what I would call smaller networking events where it's a little less clear on who's going to be there and what's the real vibe of this going to be. The purpose sounds good on paper, but the event is only as good as the audience who shows up and then the exchange. And you don't really know until you know. So yeah, that can happen for sure. And I try not to be too self-critical when that happens. If I make a mistake once, it's because I was trying. If I make the same mistake twice, maybe that's on me.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, before we wrap up, I'm going to give a few just quick tips because I think these have, we touched on them a little bit, but some things that have saved me is I have a big bag so I can throw stuff in that you gather, like all the vendors have stuff. So I have a pretty good size bag with me, but I also do that because I bring a second pair of shoes. And we talked about that, but that's my trick for Vegas is I have a pair of shoes I wear into the conference. And then I have a second pair of shoes that I change into for my walking. And those might just be like slip-on flats. So it's easy to do. I don't have to run to the bathroom. I just boop, switch shoes and keep those in my bag. And it also saves me after if I have to go do something else. So that's huge. The last thing is bring something warm because it is freezing in those rooms. And if you're cold, you can't focus. I can't. I'm tempted to bring a hand warmer next time, but I'm a mountain girl, so there's that. But at least a scarf or sweater or something you can throw in your bag and wrap up if you're freezing.
You know, you touched on another tip earlier. I'm going to bring it back around because it really resonated with me. It's one I'm going to definitely share with some clients. And it was the idea that when you're at an event, you really try to limit or not drink alcohol. I know that's a touchy subject for some folks. I'm just going to leave this in this context. Most of us know that if we've had a drink to kind of relax a little or to connect a little, that's one thing. But once you get into drinks 2, 3, and 4, I don't know anyone that I've met that turns out to be the better version of themselves, either in that moment or certainly not the next morning for that event. So just be thoughtful of that. Have a strategy going in to say, if I'm going to have a drink, I might want to decide, is that going to be alcohol? Or do I do something that's maybe just some soda water and lime? I can still carry it in a fancy glass, but I don't have to deal with how that makes me feel the next day. And that's so critical at some of these conferences because they're already emotionally and mentally taxing. If you add something like alcohol to the mix, which is already a natural depressant, you really may struggle rebounding the next day. And that can affect not just your event, but maybe the same experience others are having around you.
In my trick, soda water with a lime. Funny story, I ordered that with somebody else at a previous conference I went to, and they literally gave us the huge bottle of San Pellegrino and a slice of lime. And so it was like we were both carrying these huge things. So you never know what you're going to get, but in general, soda water with a lime works out.
All good. Kathryn, these are really great topics. I think what I'd love to invite our audience to do is add to some of these tips that we've shared or experiences that we've referenced down in the notes in the show notes below, because I think as we exchange some thoughts on that, the dialogue gets really good in the follow-up after these. And if you're attending an event this spring, I'd love to hear what you do to prep. I'd love to hear what you do to orient yourself toward your takeaways and some of the things we talked about today. So please add them in the notes below.
Absolutely. And if you see us at an event, say hi because we'll be at some. But also, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We are so happy to have you with us. Today, we talked through a whole bunch of different conference tips, how to decide if you're going to go, goals to set, how to break it all down and get as much as you can out of the conference. Thanks so much, Michael, for being on today. Please check us out on Instagram and YouTube and all the places that you can find us. Please reach out anytime, and thank you so much for listening.